The GeForce FX GPUs were so bad with DirectX 9 that when you run Half-Life 2 and it detects a GeForce FX, it will run in DirectX 8 instead of DirectX 9 in order to improve performance, but you would get lower details. Here we have some historic benchmarks comparing the GeForce FX 5800 Ultra against the ATI Radeon 9700 Pro, and in Doom 3, which uses OpenGL, the GeForce does really well, but look at Far Cry, which supports DirectX 9. The GeForce is way behind the competition. But with our hobby of playing with old computers to enjoy classic games, we have seen it many times that something that was undesirable or bad in the past slowly over time becomes desirable, and the GeForce FX range of video cards, they are quite sought after, especially for Windows 98 retro gaming. Today we're checking out the FX 5700 LE, and when you hear LE or SE, usually you should run and avoid such products. They are usually limited, they cut some corners, the performance is usually reduced. But with retro parts, you can't be too picky these days, so let's see what this video card can do. A quick look at the specifications. The GPU runs at 225 MHz. We've got 128 megabytes of VRAM, which is heaps for Windows 98. It's clocked at 200 MHz, but unfortunately connected with a 64-bit memory interface. With GeForce FX cards, I like using driver version 56.64. I've had good success in terms of both performance and compatibility. It has VGA, DVI, as well as S-Video and Composite out, so nice interfaces. And a small detail that many don't know, it can clone the output on several outputs under MS-DOS. So for example, if you want to capture with DVI, but have a CRT monitor connected to VGA, the GeForce FX video cards can do that. That's a different behavior compared to the Radeon cards. With those cards, it's one or the other. When I had a look at this graphics card, it was in quite poor state. I was able to brush off some of the dust, but inside the cooler, yeah, quite a lot of dirt. So I took everything apart, removed the cooler, unscrewed the fan, and then also cleaned the old thermal paste. And yeah, I gave everything a good clean. We've got some fresh Arctic cooling paste and put everything back together, and now the video card is as good as new and we can give it a test on our test machine. Let's begin with the main board. This one, yeah, it's been on the channel quite often. It's the Gigabyte GA-K8VM800M, a VIA chipset mainboard for socket 754. We have two DDR slots, two IDE ports, floppy port, HEP, 3 PCI slots, VIA chipset, which makes it very compatible with DOS PCI sound cards. But in this video, the focus is of course Windows 98. And in terms of CPU, we've got an Athlon 64 3400 plus, decent performance. And here an old, this is a cooler coming from a Phenom 2, I believe, Phenom 2 X4, 125 watt cooling power with a nice beefy copper core. As for RAM, less is more. We are using a single memory module. This one has 256 megabytes of capacity, DDR 400 megahertz, CL3. And for storage, we're using something different this time. Once again, we're using the StarTech SATA to ID adapter. Works brilliantly with DOS and Windows 98 projects, but we're using a different SSD, a mSATA SSD. So you have to get an adapter from mSATA to SATA, which then goes into the StarTech adapter. Here we have performance results with the 8TTO disk benchmark, and excellent performance. It maxes out the chip, the conversion chip that's on the SATA to ID adapter. In terms of the actual SSD, you have to be a little bit careful. I might do a future video comparing some of these SATA SSDs because some are really garbage with very slow performance. But this one, the Vaseki, I have them as 64 gig and 32 gig. These have excellent performance. And of course, we need decent sound. As always, my go-to Windows 98 sound card, nothing other than the Sound Blaster Live, model number CT4830 up here. And we're using the Audigy 2 ZS 2.1 drivers. They're beautiful. They even work with OEM sound cards from the Sound Blaster Live range. Here we have a Samsung 24-inch 1920 by 1200 resolution, so that's a 16 by 10 aspect ratio, and the GeForce FX supports it beautifully. We get a wonderful, nice desktop. But one highlight of this monitor is we can change the resolution to 1600 by 1200, and that gives us a perfect 4 by 3 aspect ratio, and many games support it. You will get a really sharp image, but this GeForce FX a little bit too slow. However, many games will still be quite playable. A small tip when it comes to calibrating the image with a VGA monitor, there's a button on most screens where you can automatically calibrate the image. What you need to do is click on Start, Shut Down, and you will see some sort of a grid pattern, and then press the auto adjustment function of your monitor and you will have a perfectly centered image. Alternatively, you can use some test patterns, and I created my own little patterns here. I might make them available on the website. Make sure it's full screen. It basically makes a checkerboard, and then you press the auto adjust button. It takes a while, and again you will end up with a perfectly centered image. Let's have a look at the performance, and we will start with GLQuake and dig a little bit deeper with what this video card can do. So here we have GLQuake with the default driver options, and we are checking out the resolution scaling. So we're starting off with 640 by 480 and then increasing the amount of pixels, and we can see the performance quickly drops, but up to 1280 by 1024 it's quite playable. 1600 by 1200 is borderline playable, but it's not gonna give us 60 FPS all of the time. Let's stick with OpenGL and let's play around with some of the eye candy features in the driver. The first one is called anisotropic filtering. What it does is it sharpens details as you look into the distance. I have some footage here toggling back and forth between the default driver setting, which is no AF, and then 8x AF, and you can see it's much clearer. And here we can see the performance impact. The line in orange is with 8x AF, and initially we're losing a bit of performance, but as we increase the resolution, not too much. So the bottom line is on this GPU, you can go into the driver, turn up 8x AF, and you will see a minimal performance impact. So it's something I would turn on all the time. What about anti-aliasing? Here we have some footage in a different game. I'm gonna switch back and forth and you can see what anti-aliasing does. It removes the jaggies, the pixelation from lines. And let's have a look at the performance. So we can see the performance impact is way greater. At the bottom here, the gray line has 4x AA, and we can really see that it costs a lot of performance. This GPU, unfortunately, with a 64-bit memory interface, really struggles with the memory bandwidth. We can use 4x AA maybe up to 800 by 600, but anything beyond that, and this video card struggles. I tested a few more games, but here I'm just testing with the default drivers. Quake 2, it looks very similar to GLQuake, up to 1280 by 960, very playable performance. In Quake 3 we can see the same thing. Let's check out Expendable. This uses the Direct 3D API and very similar performance. Up to 1280 by 1024 we're getting 89 FPS, which is very smooth. In Draken the performance is a little bit lower than the other games. This game is more demanding, 62 FPS at 1280 by 1024. 1600 by 1200 is a little bit too demanding. One aspect that makes the GeForce FX quite desirable is it supports 8-bit paletted textures. The card also supports table fog perfectly fine. This is something where, for example, with an ATR Radeon, you will not get support, and many games actually support that under Windows 98. Definitely more games than the palletized textures feature, so that's definitely nice to have. Because the GeForce FX supports DirectX 9, we can use nGlide. nGlide is a wrapper that translates between the Glide API into Direct 3D, and yeah, it's something that works really well. The trick is don't use the latest version of nGlide. It doesn't really work under Windows 98. There are many versions, and on the nGlide website, they've got a nice history of all the versions. I ended up using version 1.0, and I'm not saying this is the best version. It's just the one I picked randomly for this project, and it seems to be perfectly fine. And here I'm testing Screamer 4x4. It's a game I started playing, quite a lot recently. It's a fun four-wheel drive off-road racing game and has some interesting graphics. And from a technical point of view, it supports Direct 3D, OpenGL as well as Glide. There are 3 separate executables in the game folder, and here we have the game running at 800 by 600 through nGlide, and runs very well. However, this game supporting OpenGL, that's what you should be going with the GeForce FX. It will run smoother with OpenGL. So in terms of performance, we can see sort of a trend. You could see that the performance results are very similar across these games. Up to 1280 by 1024. This video card is perfectly fine. 1600 by 1200, not so much. You have to play some older games. Total Annihilation is one of these games, came out in 1997, and I believe at the time Pentium MMX era, so perfectly fine on this GPU. But if you're playing something more modern like 1998 or 1999, it will start to struggle at 1600 by 1200. And now let's have a look at the game in more detail. In a previous video I hinted at wanting to spend more time playing the actual games, sharing the experience with you, less rushing through, trying to test as many games as possible and only quickly talking about the performance. We already know what the performance is like from the benchmarks, and the game in question is Expendable. Expendable was released in 1999 and developed by Rage Software. So these are the same developers that made Incoming. And just like Incoming, this game has an integrated benchmark with a wonderful time demo. Even back in the day, it was very popular with benchmarks, comparing GPUs and processors. And to this day, in forums and in various YouTube videos, you will see Expendable being used to benchmark Windows 98 retro machines. It's an isometric action shooter with very colorful, beautiful graphics, lighting effects, and it was a showcase for 32-bit color quality. Back in those days, the Voodoo 3 against the NVIDIA River TNT 2, it was a hot topic, 32-bit colors against 16-bit colors. And Expendable was one of those games that could show the difference, as well as supporting high-res textures. So if you had a Voodoo 3, you would get lower quality textures and only 16-bit colors with that famous 22-bit output filter. So that was one of the benefits of having a NVIDIA or Radeon graphics card, 32-bit colors and higher resolution textures. There was also a modded release with a patch for the Matrox cards, like the famous Matrox G400 Max, which would add environment mapped bump mapping. But the community, of course, has reverse engineered this patch and made it working on every video card. So here we have some video footage showing you what that environment mapped bump mapping looks like. If you look at the water, you can see the surface with much more detail and it looks way nicer. So I played a few levels and it is definitely a fun shooter. The biggest challenge are the controls. So you definitely have to go into the options and map the keys for your WASD and the mouse buttons. Then the game is fairly playable, but the controls are still what's the biggest downfall in this game. There is no mouse cursor where the player points towards where your mouse cursor is. So sometimes you get disoriented and sometimes it's really hard to control. And the game doesn't really have a story, so it's a pure arcade shooter. After playing it for an hour or so, it does feel a little bit repetitive, and yeah, but it's beautiful to look at. The sound and the music is also very nice, but maybe not the most interesting game. And where can you get this game? This is the GOG version. All you have to do is install it on a modern machine and then copy the folder onto your retro gaming PC and off you go. In the setup, make sure you're changing the sound to EAX, and inside the game there are some graphics options that are set to medium. You need to change that to high and also enable the environment mapped bump mapping if you're applying the patch. I will put links to the patch and everything down below in the video description. And the other game I ended up playing quite a bit with this project is GLQuake. So Quake, released in 1998 by id Software. Well, I don't think it needs much introduction, but there are some technical aspects I want to talk about. So we are playing at the 1280 by 1024 resolution, and yeah, it looks beautiful, nice and sharp. There are many ways to play Quake these days. There are modern source port engines that you can run on a modern machine, even versions with ray tracing. But under Windows 98, I like using GLQuake. Again, I'm using the GOG version, but you need to patch it with GLQuake in order to make it work. And I will put resources down below in the video of the GLQuake patch. You also need to use some batch files to configure what resolution you want to run at. And then you need a console command to have the mouse look engaged, so it feels more like a modern game. But yeah, it supports WASD. You just have to remap some of the keys and it will be extremely playable. And I believe I've got 8x AF enabled in the footage. It runs silky smooth. We get decent audio. If you want music, so this is one of those old school games that uses audio CD. What you can do, you can burn the music tracks from the GOG release. I believe they're in MP3 or OGG format. You can burn them as an audio CD, put it into your retro machine, and it should pick up the disc and then play the correct tracks. So the FX 5700 LE, not a bad graphics card at all. At first I was a little bit worried, seeing that it's an LE model, and usually that means run and avoid. And it does have a narrower 64-bit memory interface, so that means we're not getting as much as a full 5700. The proper 5700 also has a much higher GPU clock, so if you get the real deal, you will get much better performance. But for Windows 98 retro gaming, it's good enough for a wide range of games. It supports anisotropic filtering and also anti-aliasing. For newer games, it's pushing the limit of the video card. AF you can enable without too much loss in performance, but for anti-aliasing, the performance is not quite good enough. Unless you're playing really older games, then you can play around with these settings. It supports palletized textures. For me personally, it's not a big deal. There are only a handful of games that are really affected, but it is a tick box feature that many collectors and retro gamers are looking for. More important is table fog support, especially the Radeon cards struggle here, and the NVIDIA FX does that perfectly. So all in all, the FX 5700 LE gets a thumbs up. Of course, it depends on the pricing. Looking in Australia on eBay, not too many FX cards, so the word definitely has spread. People are chasing them, but maybe because it's an LE, less desirable. But on the other hand, it's an AGP card, so anything with AGP seems to have gone up quite significantly in value. But keep your eyes out, you never know. Sometimes these are hidden in a box of video cards, a bulk purchase, so keep your eyes peeled. You never know what you will find. If you found this video interesting, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Also check your notifications. A lot of you are not getting updates. You have to press on that little bell icon and then all notifications to make sure you get updates on new releases. Leave a comment down below. I always love hearing from you. And that's it. Thank you for watching. I shall see you soon with another one.